Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first webinar about how to read and understand your MSL report. I am Ben Correa, and I am a doc student here at Loyola University Chicago, working with John and Corinne on the MSL.
Hi, I'm Corinne Kodama, and I'm also a doctoral student here at Loyola. And I've been working on the project going into my third year, and I did some of the debriefing calls last year, so I may have actually talked with some of you previously.
So we wanted to give introductions real quick and have our video on here so you can see us. Sorry it's a little bit glitchy. I'm not really sure what's going on there, but we just wanted to help you all put faces with names so you know who you'll be working with for their upcoming time on the MSL project. For the presentation, we're going to go ahead and turn off the webcam so it's not too distracting and go through this webinar. So want to start out today. We know there is going to be a lot of information in this presentation. Feel free to go ahead, because this is a recording, we decided just to forge ahead through all the information. We encourage you that at times, though, if you do need to stop, pause, and look through your report or look at information on the SSG website, we do encourage you to do so. So the goals for today is really just to basically help you understand the MSL report and how it's set up and how you can read it in preparation for the debriefing calls, which will be coming up shortly after this. We also want to provide you with a variety of resources and introduce you to the resources that are available to you. So you may want to have, for this webinar, your report in front of you. You also may want to have your ssg.net site open with the various resources inside there, and also maybe pencil, paper, pen and paper, just to write down any notes or thoughts that come up for you through this webinar, in that we will be able to discuss these questions with you more thoroughly during the debriefing call later on. So we just want to give an overview, first of all, of the MSL, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page moving forward from here. So just a quick introduction of who's who on the project. Of course, the principal investigator is Dr. John Dugan here at Loyola University Chicago, and Corinne and I work with him to administer and help institutions with the MSL. You can contact us regarding the MSL contact, the webinar, anything related to theory, how to interpret theory to practice. We'll also be doing your debriefing calls and helping you to make meaning of the results. On the other end of things, we work collaboratively with the Survey Sciences group, who are mainly in charge of the dissemination or the administration of the technical survey, the web-based survey. So you probably worked a lot with them already, Sarah, Colleen, and Scott, to prepare for data collection and through the data collection process. If you are having any problems with myssg.net access or password issues, please feel free to contact them. They'll be able to reset those for you and help you out. This year we had 88 schools participating in the MSL. A nice large group here. We had 5 coalitions. We had a Catholic, STEM, Canadian COPLAC, which is the Coalition of Public Liberal Arts Colleges, and Urban Access. We had a 33% overall response rate, so this is pretty much a pretty good response rate, on par with web-based surveys. On myssg.net, you'll notice a variety of materials that are available to you. Please make sure that you download these materials because they will be deleted after December. Some schools forget to download these things, including your raw data set. Please make sure that you download this information before December. We'd encourage you to do this here in the near future. On myssg.net, you should see your MSL report that we'll be going through today, an executive summary, a PowerPoint template. Now, the PowerPoint template is to help you to disseminate your information across campus, so it is just a template that you can fill in your own information, pick and choose slides that you would like to share with your community. Various documents with information about the social change model of leadership, also the code book for the MSL and your raw data set. Your raw data set's important, especially if you'd like to do further analysis. So feel free to make sure that you download that, especially if you want to work with institutional research in diving into that a little bit deeper. And then various school and study documentation. So you should have all those materials on your myssg.net website. The MSL is primarily based around the social change model of leadership. It is a widely used model within higher education. So this is why this is the cornerstone of the MSL. And the socially responsible leadership scale is a scale developed by Tracy Tyree to measure social change model. So this will measure students' capacity for socially responsible leadership, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we talk through some of these concepts of the model. Again, here I won't go too in depth into the social change model of leadership development. There is a lot of information out there through various books. We're hoping that many of you have had contact with this model, given your involvement with the MSL. Here is the basic construct of the model that there are 3 different domains, individual, group, society, and then 7 C's or 7 values within those domains. If you want further information or more detailed explanation of the social change model, we do encourage you to look at the concepts and connections articles located on our MSL website, leadershipstudy.net. You can download those and get an overview of the social change model for your use. So there have been some changes that have been made to the MSL this year. We want to point these out to you, especially if you've been part of our study before, just to make sure that you're aware of some of the changes that have taken place. So first of all, you'll notice that the change value that was included prior is not included in this year's study. The reason being is that the change scale seemed to measure students' attitudes toward change, not necessarily the capacity to enact change as part of leadership. So really a more accurate measure of a student's capacity to enact change is the omnibus measure, which has been included in the instrument for the past couple of years. So we encourage you to use that if you're wanting to look at students' overall capacity for socially responsible leadership. Social perspective taking was a sub-study prior to this year. Now it is one of the primary outcomes because of research is showing its connection to leadership. We wanted to include it in the main core instrument. Some new outcome scales, again, based on research and current theory. Leadership aspirations and resiliency were added to the main scale. And then our sub-studies this year are collective racial esteem and spirituality, which have been sub-studies in the past as well. So to give you a larger picture of the construct of the MSL around leadership development, you'll notice here again at the center is a socially responsible leadership. And again, that's the core of the instrument. However, we have all these other pieces now. As you can see in the past, cognitive skills have been included throughout the years, and so has leadership efficacy. So those are still main components that we see here with core outcomes measured with the MSL. But again, we've added resiliency and leadership aspirations and social perspective taking. So this gives you a larger picture of what's being measured in the MSL. This gives you a little outline of what each of those areas mean, the definitions for the outcomes. For those of you who are not familiar, complex cognitive skills involves critical thinking, making complex connections. Leadership efficacy deals with one's internal belief and their ability to enact leadership. Social perspective taking is basically being able to walk in another person's shoes or see the world through another person's perspective. Aspirations deals with someone's drive to take on leadership roles in their future career. And then resiliency is someone's ability to handle changes and stress and difficult situations. So With those outcomes, they are embedded within or influenced by our college environment. So the instrument also measures various aspects of our environment, the collegiate environment. So these can be the programs that you offer, this can be the structural dimensions, the compositional diversity of your institution. This can be a variety of environmental factors that influence the development of these areas. And then this is all placed within the broader social context. So these are the demographic, usually the demographic information. So gender identity, race, ethnicity. These social contexts affect the ways in which students experience their environments and develop within these areas. So they can be they can promote learning in these areas, but they can also constrain depending on whether someone is privileged within the community, has a privileged identity, or whether someone has a marginalized identity within the community. This is the first time you may be seeing this model. It's something that we've been looking at and trying to develop to help people get a better picture of what the MSL measures. A lot of people directly just associate the MSL with just the social change model, but it is actually much broader than that, and we want to make sure that people can see that and understand how this all fits together.
Okay, now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of reading the report, which is, I think, why a lot of you are on this webinar. And so, again, as Ben mentioned earlier, there's kind of a lot of detail here, and so feel free to pause it. It would be helpful if you have your report in front of you. We'll be showing a few screenshots from the report to help you interpret it, but we're not going to obviously be able to show you all of it. So if you could follow along with your report, and again, this webinar, you can watch again, and we will have the PowerPoint up so you can, again, look at all of the details that we're going to talk about. So the MSL report is just one part of the MSL. So it contains results that of tables for the primary outcomes that Ben mentioned earlier, the socially responsible leadership scale, leadership efficacy, complex cognitive skills, and the new outcome measures as well, social perspective taking, aspirations, and resiliency. However, it does not contain results from every section or every question of the MSL. So it focuses on the primary outcomes and some particular inputs and environments that will relate to that, and we'll get into that in a minute. So it doesn't have every single question that was on the MSL. That is in your full data set, which you do have access to through your myssg.net. So again, the MSL report doesn't have everything, but it has the things that we think most schools are primarily interested in. And it also includes some benchmarking information, which I'll talk about in a minute. So the way your report is set up, the introductory pages basically have a lot of what Ben just told you. So it has a lot of the background and overview of the MSL. It has some of the psychometric information regarding the scales that are included in the instrument. It has a list of all the schools, and it has a few tips for reading the report. And the way the report is organized is by data source. So most of you will sort of have two reports. You'll have one report, which is the first 64 pages, that will have all the data organized by your school. So that is your school's sample, your school's data. And then you will also have, following that, from page 65 to 94, a similar report structured pretty much exactly the same, but instead of your school's data, it has the national data. And the reason we do that is so that you can look and see, how your school might be comparing to the national data set. Now, some of you have a comparative sample. That was an option that you had when you signed up for the study. So if you have a comparative sample, instead your comparative sample data will be from pages 65 to 94, and your national data will be from 95 to 124. And as you look through your report, you'll be able to see that. The top left corner of your report has the name of the data source. So it will say, for example, Loyola University, Loyola Comparative Sample, or national data. The way it's organized is the first section of your report is titled Inputs by Outcomes. So that is basically student characteristics and demographics on the outcomes of the study. The second grouping of tables is called Environments by Outcomes, and these relate to looking at the outcomes based on college experiences, like your leadership programs, other activities that might be happening in college. Then at the very end of the report, there's one page that summarizes the sub-study data. Again, sub-studies are not covered in any detail in this report, but instead it just summarizes the outcomes. But you do have all the data in your data set if you want to look into those sub-studies further. After that, there's a section called Respondent Distributions, and it tells you how many people were in each category of responses. And again, I'll show that to you later. And then the last part of the report, it lists all the qualitative responses for what leadership means. There's one qualitative question at the end, and all those responses are included there. If you had custom questions, those are not included in this MSL report. So some of you, most of you don't have custom questions, but some of you do. It was an option when you signed up for the study. You can order a separate supplemental report for that, or just examine it within your data set. But we're not going to spend any time on custom questions during this webinar. So to start going through your report, on page 29 to 31, this is gives you information on your sample. And this is very important. You need to keep in mind whose results you're looking at, because obviously we sampled 4,000 students on most campuses, but 4,000 students did not respond, as I'm sure you're aware. So you need to consider when you're looking at your results, these are the results of not 4,000 students. These are the results of people who actually filled it out. So we have two tables here. One is response rate. And so that is of your random sample of 4,000 students who responded. So what percentage of women on your campus responded? What percentage of African Americans on your campus responded? However, what more people are typically interested in is the respondent characteristics. So what that is that describes your MSL sample. So of those people who took the MSL, what is the composition of that? So that's typically what more people are going to be interested in. But it's a good thing to remember when you're interpreting your results. If some things don't make sense, or they seem imbalanced, or they don't match the national data, it might have something to do with who actually filled it out. We also contain benchmarks in the MSL report. When you signed up, you could select several benchmarks to compare your institution against. And so in a lot of the tables, there will be columns that compare your school's results to other institutions. If you had a comparative sample, that should be one of your benchmarks, unless you requested it not to be. Similarly, if you are part of a coalition, that will also be a benchmark column. The list of who is in these benchmarks is on page 26 to 28. So if you selected, say, small schools or highly selective institutions, you can see who of the 88 schools fits into that group. And something to consider for yourself when you're working through this to think about with your team is, would you expect to be similar or different from your benchmark groups? That's going to be a different answer for everyone, but it's something to consider. Obviously, everyone wants to be higher scores than your benchmarks, but that might not necessarily match maybe the efforts you're doing on your campus, or the differences in mission that you might have with other schools, or things like that. So it's just something to consider, is how do you want to use your benchmarks? So there are several different kinds of tables that we're going to go through in a minute. And we want to make sure that you understand kind of what you're looking at. The first thing to do is to make sure to check the top left corner of whatever page you're looking at to remind yourself what data it is. Because sometimes You might be flipping through it and you realize, oh wait, this is the national tables. I need to be looking at my school tables. So make sure that you know what you are looking at. Some of the tables read horizontally and some of them read vertically. So these things I'm mentioning now are just things to keep in mind. 4 of the scales are on 5-point scales. A couple of them are on 4-point scales. So when you're looking at the results, they're not directly comparable against each other in terms of number. Like a 3.5 means something very different on a 4-point scale than on a 5-point scale. And we have pointed that out as much as possible throughout the report, but it's something to keep in mind. We didn't do that on purpose to confuse you. These were, pre-developed scales, and to maintain their robustness and validity, we use them as they were designed to be used. So that is why they are as they are. So we realize that can be a little confusing for some people. The other thing you want to think about when you're looking at your report is the difference between descriptive data and statistical data. Descriptive data is just the raw numbers. For example, one group might have a 3.5 and another group might have a 3.3. So you can see that one group has higher scores than the other. However, what we are most concerned about is data that is statistically significant. And that is something that, again, is indicated throughout the report that I will show you in a moment. And that is based on whether it's really like a real difference through statistical procedures, if it is difference that is more than just chance, that it's actually meaningful, that it means something. So we have included that as well. Because something might be, one group might have slightly higher scores than another, but it might not be statistically significant. It's just a difference, but maybe it's just by chance that happened. The other thing to consider is the difference between significance and effect size. When you're working with large data sets, such as the MSL, often when you do these kinds of quantitative analyses, a lot of significant things show up because there are so many people in this data set. It's likely that there's going to be difference somewhere. So we've also included effect size on many of the tables. And so the effect size tells you whether that significance is meaningful or not. So it's sort of the next step from significance is effect size. And you can read about this in various statistical books or journal articles or whatever, but the main thing we want to emphasize is you want to look at anything that has a small effect size or larger. So if it says a trivial effect size, that means it's probably not worth paying attention to, or it doesn't really mean much. So anything that is small effect size or larger is something you want to pay attention to. Okay, so now we're going to actually look at a table. So I'd like you to go to page 32 in your report. I will show you one in a moment. And this table, as you can see here, this is page 32. This is the kind of main summary of everything in the MSL, sort of. It's kind of your main go-to table. This is a summary of all the primary outcomes, which are listed on the left column, based on, that's the main outcomes of the study, and this is the average of your entire sample. So if you looked in the top left corner, it'll say, like on here, it says Leadership University. That should say your school name in your data set. Across the top, it'll have the benchmarks that you have selected. So the first column is your data, the one that's listed in blue here. And then the next 5 columns are benchmarks. And pretty much everybody will have the national sample as a benchmark. And then you will have other groups that you've selected. So the main outcomes are the social change model leadership outcomes. And you can see the 7 C's here. Right here, and then you can see the omnibus, and so that is an average of all of the 7 C's put together. Some schools are more interested in the omnibus, some schools are more interested in looking at the individual values. That is up to you. Note also that resiliency is listed in this section of the report. It had to do with some of the report structuring, so it's not part of the social change model per se. But because of the way the report was structured, this is where it ended up. So I'm sorry if that's confusing. Then there's leadership, advocacy, complex cognitive skills, aspirations, and social perspective taking. So there's a few things here I would like you to look at. So first of all, you want to look at your data. So let's say this is your data looking down the left column. The M stands for mean, so that is your score. Social change model leadership is on a 5-point scale. So as you can see, most of the scores here are in the 4s. SD means standard deviation. For those of you that are into statistics, you may find that important. Other people may not, which is fine. And then as you look across to the right, you'll see a few boxes that have an S. Like, for example, right here where the cursor is, I don't know if you can see that. I'm thinking you can, is citizenship. And there's a yellow box that has a white S in it under the SIG column. That's what you want to look at on this table here. And what that S tells you is that your school scores on citizenship are significantly different from the national data's scores on citizenship. And as you can see on this report, it's also significantly different from the comparative sample, from Carnegie Peers Very High, and from campus peer settings. So that's where you can see if you are different from other schools' results. Then what you want to look at is what is the direction of the difference. So if you can look at this example, the score here is a 4.04. The national sample's average is 3.95. So this school's data means that they're higher on citizenship than the national sample. However, if you look at that compared to their comparative sample, the average score is 404. The average score of the comparative sample is 4.37. I'm guessing this school's comparative sample might be all seniors, or they might be students that have already been in the leadership program, so they might have higher scores on this variable. So that's how you read this. You want to look for an S in the SIG column. Now, the effect column, which is right next to it, at the bottom of the page, there's a guide to effect sizes. So that little line means trivial, meaning, yeah, it's significant, but statistically, it's kind of not really that meaningful. However, if you move over here to the comparative sample, small, that's something that tells you something, like there is a difference between our comparative sample and our average scores across the main sample. So that's how you read this, is you look for an S, that shows where you're different or not, and then look at the effect size. Now, just because it's not significant doesn't mean that that's bad. It means that you are close to the average. Which is going to be the case for a large majority of your schools on a large majority of these issues. So that doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. It just means you're average. And so that's fine for some people. You may be interested in the raw scores themselves, which scores are higher and which scores aren't. So there's a lot of ways you can even read this one table, but that's what you want to look for. So you want to look at what's your scores, where are the benchmarks, the significance, and if it's lower or higher. Okay, now what we're going to go into, the next set of tables, is the change over time. And as you know, the MSL is not a longitudinal study. It is a cross-sectional design. But research shows that pre-college experiences do matter. And so there is a measure within the MSL to sort of control for the effect of pre-college experiences. So it's sort of a quasi-pretest on the primary outcomes of the study. So if you look at this, now this table reads slightly different from the other. You can see Leadership University is in the top left side. The outcomes are down along the left. The benchmarks are across the top. And here, though, the significance is not if your results are different from the benchmarks, but if your senior students perceive a growth in themselves since their first year. So what we basically have done is asked students, this is based on seniors only, we've asked them how they would self-rate where they were when they got to college, basically. So it's sort of a retrospective for the students. And again, this is based on seniors only, so this is not your entire sample, on their perceptions of their growth in college. So if you look at the first one here, consciousness of self, seniors currently say they're around a 4.19, for example. Prior to college, they would say they were maybe around a 3.44. You can see there's an S, meaning that is a significant difference, meaning that they believe that they perceive some growth in consciousness of self during the time that they have been in college. If you look at the effect size, that's a large effect size. That is rare. We hardly ever, we don't see that very often. But that means that something that's happening while these students are in college is really contributing to their growth in consciousness of self. So again, and then you could see for the national sample, that was actually the same thing this year. So this, again, this does not compare directly to other benchmarks, but the significance is referring to the significant growth between prior to college and senior year. So you want to look at where there is change as well as where there isn't change. And is this what you would expect? Also, the direction of it's usually an increase, but it is not always. So sometimes scores may actually go down between where they were prior to college and their senior year. And I don't see that on this particular report, but that has happened. So make sure you examine what the direction of the difference is as well. Here's another slide of the measuring change over time, and this is on the other outcomes. So just so you know, and again, if you look, it tells you in the shaded light gray box if it's on a 5-point or 4-point scale to kind of help you keep track of that. Okay, now the next set of tables is the inputs by outcomes, and this examines student characteristics. So I will show you this table. So this is on page 35 and 36 for most of you. So this is an example of looking at it on the non-SRLS outcomes. So the outcomes are leadership efficacy, complex cognitive skills, social perspective taking, and aspirations. And then the student characteristics are here on the left. So for example, let's look at, I'm trying to think which one, probably the best one to look at would be, we'll look at the easy one, transfer status, if you're a transfer student or if you're not a transfer student. So you can see the raw scores on the items. Now in this table, what you are looking for is, if you see in the third column under social perspective taking, there's a number 2 and a number 1 in the SIG column. In this table, in the inputs by outcome tables, that is what you are looking for. You're looking for a number in the SIG column. And what that tells you is there's a significant difference between groups 1 and 2. And so you can see that transfer students have higher scores on social perspective taking than non-transfer students. If you go down to the political views column under complex cognitive skills, you can see again 2, 3, 4 in the first box, then 1, 1, 1. Basically what that tells you is the group that is very liberal is significantly different from groups 2, 3, and 4. So I hope that makes sense. So these tables you read slightly differently than before. You're not looking for an S in the column, you're looking for a number. That number tells you if there is a significant difference between the groups. So if there's no number, it means it's not statistically significantly different. It might mean it's different. It still might be different, but it's not statistically significant. And again, you don't want to assume that participation in something or membership in a particular group would mean a higher score. It could be lower. Okay, now the next page, let's see, did I have a, yeah, okay, so this is another example of this, but instead of, let's see, sorry. So it's just another example of where you can see differences. This is a good example to show you because if you look under the race variable, if you look at American Indian, there's a dot in those boxes. The dot means that there are less than 15 people in that category. So we did not report the responses due to confidentiality. It is in your data set if you want to look at that, but we do not publish results of anything where there's less than 15 members of a particular group. So that's something to point out. Now, the next section tends to be the one that most people are interested in, and these are the environments by outcome measures. So they're similar to the tables I just showed you, but instead of student characteristics, it contains participation in college experiences, such as your leadership programs, which most of you work in. So here's an example. Again, it's like the previous tables. Check the top left corner to make sure you're looking at the right data. The outcomes are listed across the top. And then the different groupings and whether students have participated in them. Some of them are on a yes or no scale. Some of them are a frequency kind of scale that you can see as never, once, sometimes, many times, much of the time. And again, what you are looking for is you are looking for numbers in the SIG column. So off-campus job, those that have on the first slide consciousness of self. Those that have an on-campus job are significantly different from those who don't, and they have a higher score on consciousness of self. So the idea, the way you can find this useful, is if you find participation in an experience seems to correlate with higher scores, then generally you probably want to do more of that. If an experience does not show a difference, which is not uncommon actually, or if the difference is in a negative direction, you might need to consider why that might be. What is the content of the program? What is actually happening in there? And how does that relate to the outcome in particular? Because again, you may be interested only in the omnibus SRLS, or you may be interested in one particular aspect of it. And that will change how you use this report. The next thing I wanted to mention, though we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, is the sub-studies. As we mentioned, there are 2 sub-studies this year, collective racial esteem and spirituality, and half of your sample participated in either one of those. These are content areas that we are interested in, that we believe are related to leadership, and so we include them to be able to do some additional research to make some connections with the MSL. And again, there's only the overview here. It's on page 95 or page 125. And you can see, again, the brief summary here of it. Again, if you would like more information on this, it is in your report. You can even get a supplemental, not in your report, sorry, in your data set. You could get a supplemental report if you are particularly interested in more data on these sub-studies. And then the final pages of the reports, again, depending on if you have a comparative sample or not, this will tell you who and how many people filled out each question. So if you look at this, you can see male, that's 346 students, female, that's 772 students. That's going to affect your results quite a bit. If you have twice as many females as males, given the research has shown that females score differently on some of these items. So this can, again, help give you additional information of how to interpret the findings that you see in your report. And this is near the end of your data, end of the report. Also, starting on page 103 or page 133, there are answers to the one qualitative question on the MSL, which was, please provide a brief definition of what the term leadership means to you. Again, you can do with this information what you want. There are some frequently asked questions and some common concerns that come up, and so we're not going to go into it in too much detail here, but I wanted to raise them so no one panics if they feel like this is something that they are experiencing. For some schools, low response rate is an issue. Most of the schools did pretty well this year, but if you have a concern, you know, we can discuss this on your call. the MSL has shown to be valid even with a lower response rate, but the primary thing to consider is to, again, look at those respondent characteristics and see who is in your sample so that you can see whether that is representative of your campus or not. Comparison to benchmarks. People use the benchmarks in different ways, as I mentioned previously. If you, for example, have a really high focus on citizenship at your institution, in your mission, in your leadership programs, you would probably expect your scores on citizenship to be higher than your benchmarks. However, if you don't have that kind of focus, there probably isn't any reason for you to expect that those scores would be higher. So it kind of depends what you're looking at and who you're comparing yourself against. Also, some people express concern that they don't see more significant differences throughout the report, and that actually is more common than not. There are lots of sections on the reports where you may not see significance, and we can discuss that further on your call, but to let you know that that's not unusual. And again, what you need to think about is who responded to this question, and the other thing in particular is you want to think about what is going on in that particular program, the content of the program, and how does that target the outcome that you're looking at. Because what we find is sometimes campuses have a lot of leadership programs, but they're not necessarily directed towards socially responsible leadership outcomes, so you're not going to see much of a result on the MSL. So again, that's something you can discuss further on your call with Ben and I when we get to that point. Similar to that is a lower score after participation or experience as opposed to a higher score. Again, that's not super unusual. It can happen, and so don't freak out about it, but we can discuss that on your call. Now, the final section, the final thing I want to discuss here is to consider really how to make meaning of the results now that you know how to read them and see what they are. Then it's trying to understand and interpret what it means. And so there's a few questions that you should think about and discuss with your team here. And the first thing is, what is unique or special about leadership programs on your campus? What do you focus on in your efforts? Is there some particular aspect of socially responsible leadership that you target or not? And that can help set up your expectations for what you would want to find on in your report. So do you target some aspects of socially responsible leadership directly, or is it more a general leadership program with kind of a combination of a variety of different philosophies and outcomes? That often is reflected in the scores that you get. So there's a couple different strategies you can use for using your report. The first strategy is that you can identify an outcome you are most interested in. For example, as I mentioned, citizenship, and investigate it from that angle. The other way to do it is to identify a population of interest, say Asian Americans, and look at it from that perspective, or a particular program of interest, say your freshman seminar program, and examine it from that lens. And so I'm going to show you how to do that. And then you use the respondent distributions to discover who or how many people responded to particular questions to help add some insight. So the first strategy is if you focus on a core outcome. For example, if you were interested in controversy with civility, first you would go to the overview table that was way back on page 30, I think it's 32 or something like that, and see what your scores, your school scores are on that particular outcome and how it compares with the benchmarks. So that would be the first thing you could do. Then you could go through the report and look at all the levels of controversy with civility by student characteristics and inputs, or by environments and college experiences. And then you also want to see, again, in what direction do those particular variables impact that. And then you might look in the respondent characteristics to see who responded to those items. So by doing that, you could get a really good sense of what impacts controversy with civility on your campus or what doesn't, and if your students are scoring higher or lower, or particular groups of students are scoring higher or lower. So that would be one way that you could use your report. So the second strategy is, say you're focusing on a particular program, say a first year experience, you can go to the environments by outcome tables in all the outcome sections and look for the first year experience line and see if participation in a first year experience results in any significant differences on the SRLS outcomes or the other MSL outcomes, and in what direction. Then what you could do is, once you have those results, to consider how those results compare with where you actually focus time and energy in that program. What are the activities you do in the program? What is the guiding philosophy for that program? What is the content of that program? What are students learning and experiencing? And how might that relate to the outcomes that you're seeing in your report?
Again, we want to reiterate, it is very important for you to download your full data set, which is on myssg.net. This is your raw data. This is for you to use. It's formatted for SPSS. So hopefully, if someone in your area knows how to use or SPSS, or if you want to contact somebody in your institutional research to help you navigate that, we really encourage you to dig deeper with that information. However, if you don't have access to anybody who really understands how to use SPSS, we do encourage you to contact SSG for additional services, and they can provide you pricing for that. So we really would encourage you to go ahead, and now that we've explained how to read the report and given you some ideas of strategies of how to approach it, really take some time either individually or with your team to sit with the report and look through it. By doing so, you can get a sense or formulate some questions or ideas about what you're reading in your report in preparation for the briefing call with Karina and I. So go ahead and spend some time with your report. Also, you may want to review the model, the social change model, or the models earlier in the presentation, just to get a review your understanding of how the whole MSL is set up. And then we'll schedule the debriefing call. So you should have received an email by now letting you know how to go ahead and do that. We have split up all the institutions between the two of us, so you'll be getting an email directly from Karina and I, just letting you know who is going to be your primary contact from this point forward. So the debriefing calls are designed to help you get to better understand what your data means for your institution. So these are a 1-hour phone call that we hold during the months of August, September, October, whatever works best for your schedule. We'll be posting Google Docs for our schedules so that you can sign up and in whatever time frame works best for you. We do realize that this is a busy time of the year, unfortunately, for many institutions, especially end of August, beginning of September. So we have tried to spread out options throughout the 3 months for your institution. We do encourage you to sign up early so that we know and make sure that we can get all institutions fit into our schedule. We will make sure that we have all of you completed, but just please sign up early if you want your first preference as far as time frame for that. Again, please bring any questions you may have from either this presentation or from the time you spent reviewing your report, and we can explore those together in that conversation. So if you have any questions in the interpretations or about the debriefing calls, here's our contact information in case you need to get a hold of us. Also, again, if you're having problems with access or anything on myssg.net, there are the contacts for Colleen and Sarah. Please feel free to contact them if you do need anything related to the website. Some additional resources we want to point out, and hopefully you've already received information about this, is that we have revamped the MSL website. We wanted to make it much more user-friendly and provide you with additional resources that can help you in both the interpretation process, but also understand some of the national findings that we've discovered over the years and some of the work we're doing with it currently. So please check out the website, and there's additional resources there for you. As we come up with new resources or have additional webinars, we will be posting them through the site. Again, also, once we kind of get the ball rolling here a little bit later in August, we will be putting together a listserv for all of the 2012 MSL participants. We're hoping that you'll be able to use this listserv to communicate with each other. So for example, if some of you are particularly interested in controversy with civility and talking about various interventions that your campuses may be doing with that, you can discuss those through this listserv, or throw out other ideas or questions to the community. We're hoping that we can all learn from each other through this process, and hence providing you with a venue to do so. We've also been trying to capitalize on social media a little bit more, so you should have seen this already as well. We do have a Facebook group. Again, we're hoping people will capitalize on communication with each other through this, as well as we'll be posting various updates, so that you don't have to always go back to the website to try to check for updates. We will be letting you know about updates to the website through Facebook. We will also let you know various brief updates or through Twitter. We'll also be posing various questions throughout the year just to get you thinking about either your data or about the MSL or about certain findings from the MSL, and just helping you to keep leadership education and various aspects of leadership education in the forefront of your mind. And then the YouTube channel will be primarily used for webinar postings, but we also plan to highlight or favorite various clips or other videos that we think would be helpful for leadership education. So we hope that you use these various forms of social media, and that we can stay connected throughout the years with you through that way. We appreciate you all joining us with this. We know there was a lot of information that was just thrown at you in this short period of time. Again, we recorded this for a reason, so you could go back, look at various parts of the presentation, and hopefully prepare you to make the most of our debriefing calls that will be taking place in August, September, October. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'll be more than happy to help you out in any way. But we look forward to talking with all of you in the next few months. Thank you very much.